All right, welcome back. This is going to be part 79 of my presentation on the flood and Noah's Ark. And guys, we're going to continue on with the topic of the Ice Age and the mammoths. The mammoths, we're going to continue on with that and show you some really interesting things that they've discovered about the mammoths that gives them ideas of how they died, Even though not even creationists agree, you know, there's only two areas. They're basically in two trains of thought. There are those like Walt Brown that believe that the mammoths died at the beginning of the flood. Beginning of the flood, that's when they froze. And then there's those that believe that they died at the end or the tail end of the Ice Age. And so that would be where Michael Ord would fall into place. Only two. And as far as the Ice Age, when it happened, you've got some that say that the Ice Age started at the beginning of the flood. And then you've got some that say that the Ice Age started at the end of the flood. And so about a year difference, And so it's not that, I don't think it's that big a deal. It's just, that's just the way they believe. It is a mysterious thing, guys. As far as some of the things that they have found, because as we saw in the last video, they found evidences or discoveries and reports of things that froze extremely fast. And then there's other things that they found where it shows that it didn't freeze as fast as they thought, at least some of the things that they found. And then there's reports of the miners digging for gold and stuff that say that they have found mammoth carcasses at least once a year. Every year they're drumming up carcasses, and due to the business and the trade and how if they find something, scientists are going to come in there and they're going to keep them from being productive. They're there to find gold. There's money invested into this. There's workers and stuff like that. And to have their digging stop for an excavation, which could last, weeks, it's going to put them behind. They just move on and keep going through it. So there's no telling what's been found out here. And because of the businesses and some people, they don't care. They don't care what historical significance may be. They just move on through it. They may collect some of the stuff and take it home. But other than that, they don't let anybody know about it. And so it's just maybe, through conversations and stuff. That's how some of this stuff is passed along. And so, but, it is a very interesting topic. And so, but if you'll notice on the screen here, they've also seen that the mammoths look as though they have suffocated, and other animals too look like they've suffocated and they didn't drown. And so very interesting. So this right here is the Berezovka mammoth, which was found in the upright position. It had several ribs, a shoulder blade, and pelvis were broken. The long bone in its right foreleg was crushed into about a dozen pieces without any apparent damage to the soft tissue around it, which is absolutely amazing. That shows you a tremendous amount of pressure was put on that animal. And then Michael Ord also states that when they got to looking into the insides of this animal, they had found that the stomach had rotted to a certain degree. So, and that would show, guys, that the animal didn't freeze as fast as what some say. Now, of course, when we're talking about the whole digestive area and the digestive system on an elephant, not everything is digested at the same time or in the way that we would traditionally think that we digest food. It goes into our stomach, and then the stomach acids eat it up. That's not the way a stomach in an elephant's work. And so only about maybe half of the actual material gets digested. And so then that would help that would show in some of these findings and these discoveries where they have undigested food in their system. That would make sense because in a natural way, a elephant digests its food. That's just a normal way it happens, and so it not necessarily be due to the freezing, though the food that was in the mouth of the elephant was still being chewed, and they didn't even have a chance to swallow it. Though the mouth area isn't as surrounded like the stomach cavity is, and so the stomach cavity, it's going to take more time for the cold to get to that center part. So if it's a certain amount of length of time, the insides of it after it dies is going to start rotting and decaying. And so that would make more sense on what Michael Ord was stating, that they had found the stomach had decayed at a certain level. And so, but at any rate, let's look at some interesting things about this Berezovka mammoth and the idea that it may have suffocated. It says that the most famous, accessible, and studied mammoth is a 50-year-old male found in a freshly eroded bank 100 feet above Siberia's Berezovka River in 1900. A year later, an expedition led by Dr. Otto F. Herz painstakingly excavated the frozen body and transported it to the Zoological Museum in St. Petersburg, Russia. Berezovka was upright, although his back was excessively humped, and his straightened hind legs were rotated forward at the hips into an almost horizontal position. This strange contorted position was further exaggerated by his raised and spread front legs. Several ribs, a shoulder blade, and pelvis were broken. Amazingly, the long bone in his right foreleg was crushed into about a dozen pieces without noticeably damaging the surrounding tissue. There had been considerable bleeding between the muscle and the fatty and connective tissues. His shaggy, wire-like hair, some of it 20 inches long, was largely intact. His erect penis was horizontally flattened. This organ in a live elephant is round, S-shaped, and never horizontal. Now, that last part about the penis, they found something in it that showed that it that gave evidence that it had suffocated. We're going to talk about that here in just a second. What can we conclude from these unusual details? To crush a slender rod, which the leg bone resembles, requires axial compression, while the rod or bone is encased in some material that prevents bending and snapping. To demonstrate this, place a long, straight stick vertically on a table and see how difficult it is to compress and break it into a dozen or so pieces. Instead, it will snap at the weakest point. If the stick has a slight bend, as do the long leg bones, crushing becomes almost impossible. Something must prevent the stick or bone from bending as the compressive load increases. Evidently, Berezovka's leg bone was severely compressed lengthwise while rigidly encased. The considerable bleeding shows that this crushing occurred before or soon after death. Slow suffocation of males can produce penile erection. Tolmakov concluded that the death of Berezovka by suffocation is proved by the erected male genital, a condition inexplicable in any other way. But why was the penis horizontally flattened? It had to be pressed between two horizontal surfaces, one of which was probably his abdomen. Again, considerable vertical compression must have acted within some medium encasing the entire body. Suffocation is also implied with four other frozen giants. Volosovich concluded that his second buried mammoth found with a penile erection on Bolshoi Lyakov Island had suffocated. A third example is provided by Dima, whose preliminary alveoli, suggested by asphyxia. After great exertion just before death, the Pallas rhinoceros also showed symptoms of asphyxiation. The blood vessels and even the fine capillaries were seen to be filled with brown coagulated blood, which in many places still preserved its red color. This is exactly the kind of evidence we look for when we want to know whether an animal has been drowned or suffocated. Asphyxia is always accompanied by the gorging of the capillaries with blood. Von Schrank's rhinoceros was found with expanded nostrils and an open mouth. Investigators concluded that the animal died from suffocation, which it tried to avoid by keeping the nostrils wide asunder. In all 3 mammoths and 2 rhinoceroses apparently suffocated. No other cause of death has been shown for the remaining frozen giants. All right, now at the bottom there, I've got a note about Dima. It says, in 1977, the first complete baby mammoth was found, a 6 to 12-month-old male named Dima. His flattened, emaciated, but well-preserved body was encased in a lens of ice, 6 feet below the surface of a gentle mountainous slope. Portions of the ice were clear and others quite brownish yellow with mineral and organic particles. Silt, clay, and small particles of gravel were found throughout his digestive and respiratory tracts, trachea, bronchi, and lungs. Most mammoths were fat and well fed, but before being frozen, Dima may have suffered from one of many problems common to baby elephants. Within their first year of life, up to 36% of elephants die. And so that's just a little bit extra information on Dima. Going on here, the ice layer directly under the Berezovka mammoth contains some hair still attached to its body. Below his right forefoot was the end of a very hairy tail of a bovine animal, probably a bison. Also under the body were the right forefoot and left hindfoot of a reindeer. The whole landslide of the Berezovka River was the richest imaginable storehouse of prehistoric remains. In the surrounding loamy soil was an antelope skull, the perfectly preserved upper skull of a prehistoric horse to which fragments of muscular fiber still adhered, tree trunks, tree fragments, and roots. This vegetation differed from the amazingly well-preserved plants in the mammoth's mouth and stomach, which is amazing. That's quite interesting. Now, since it brought up the prehistoric horse, there was a foal that was found. And I'm just throwing this in, guys, just for the little extra something on your plate. That what they found. And so I'm going to show you a picture of this also. But a Siberian Ice Age foal has liquid blood and urine. It says a fully intact 2 weeks old linear horse, now extinct species, foal, was found in Siberian permafrost. And we're going to talk about permafrost here in just a minute. The hair cover also preserved, which was extremely rare. Most parts of the carcass, especially at the head and legs, the internal organs were beautifully preserved, and the muscle tissue still had its natural reddish color from myoglobin. Even rarer, there were still blood in the vessels and urine in the bladder. Only one other case where liquid blood was found from the Pleistocene, which was, you're talking about the Ice Age epoch, 2.6 million years to 11,700 years ago. Again, this is uniformitarian evolutionary timeline. Was that of an adult mammoth discovered in 2013. Blood coagulates, turns to powder in the ancient remains of animals of the Ice Age. even if well preserved. Remains are preserved best if they are in ice, as the mammoth was. Evidence showed that the foal drowned in mud and silt, which was found in its intestinal tract, which was then frozen into permafrost. Semyon Grigoriev, head of the Mammoth Museum at Yakutsk, said that both the animal's death and preservation happened quickly. The date given for the age of the foal is 42,000 years. Again, this is uniformitarian timeline. Though some are pessimistic, researchers are hoping to clone the extinct species. Even with the unique preservation of the blood, the main blood cells, the red blood cells, or erythrocytes, do not have nuclei with DNA. Grigoriev said, "We are trying to find intact cells and muscle tissue and internal organs that are also very well preserved." Now, when you're talking about permafrost, what is permafrost? If you'll notice the yellow highlighted area, permafrost is soil, rock, or sediment that remains at or below freezing, which is 32 degrees Fahrenheit, for 2 or more consecutive years. Most of the tundra in Siberia is in a permafrost condition, perpetually frozen to great depths. However, the top 90 to, well, basically 3 to 4 feet, the top 3 to 4 feet thaws enough in the summer to permit mosses, lichens, flowering plants, stunted shrubs, and hordes of mosquitoes to flourish. I heard the mosquitoes out there are absolutely unbelievable. Any rate, in Alaska, permafrost is found beneath nearly 85% of Alaska. It is the thickest and the most extensive in Arctic Alaska. North of the Brooks Range, presently virtually everywhere, and extending as much as 2,000 feet below the surface of the Arctic coastal plains. And this right here is a chart of permafrost for Alaska. And you got the colors that give you the different ranges and what it is. Now, you'll notice the continuous and discontinuous. Now, this is from 2008. Now, the permafrost today is divided up into discontinuous and continuous zones. Discontinuous permafrost forms when the average temperature is around 30 degrees Fahrenheit, while continuous permafrost forms when the annual average temperature has fallen to 20 degrees Fahrenheit or below. So again, if you guys want to pause this and take a look at that, that's what the permafrost distribution for Alaska is. When we're talking about mammoth, the mammoth population, I was going to read the entire thing that Michael Ord has in pages 145 to 148. Just remember that if you want to get this book, it's an outstanding book, guys, outstanding book. But he's got an area in here where he talks about mammoth populations. And just to kind of just be brief about it and give the summation of it, this is what they believe about the mammoth population after the flood. This is after the flood. It says here, notice the highlighted area on this slide, and then we're going to continue on to another slide. But it says a shortcut is to estimate woolly mammoth doubling rate by comparing them to the reproductive rates for various herds of African elephants for which there is data. Haynes reports that in the Huange National Park, the elephant population increased from 13,000 to 22,000 in 20 years. This is a doubling rate of about 25 years. This reproductive rate is in spite of poaching and drought. If mammoths increased at this rate, there would be 8 million living mammoths in 550 years after the flood. Now he goes on. However, the elephant reproductive rate can be significantly faster. Mithen states that population increases of 2 to 5% per year are commonly reported for African elephants. At a 4% rate, doubling about every 18 years, there would be 657 million mammoths in 500 years. Mithun, and also reports that in Edo National Park, South Africa, the population increased 7% per year for 27 years. Which is likely the maximum possible growth rate in Africa today. This is a doubling time of about 10 years, which is the estimate I had previously used for mammoths. And then he gives his, when he was talking about it, his reference there. At this doubling rate, there would be 1.3 billion mammoths living 300 years after the flood. This estimate probably is close to the mammoth reproduction rate, especially in the early years after the flood, when the number of predators was still small and the environment more ideal. So there is no problem accounting for millions of woolly mammoths during a 700-year ice age. And that's the span of time that Michael says that the ice age happened. 500 years for it to build up, and then 200 years of meltback. And so, anyway, going on, it says, from the remains of mammoths in Siberia and Alaska, the mammoth population was apparently healthy with little sign of predation. Guthrie reports that most mammoths live to a ripe old age based on teeth wear. The above reproduction rates are estimates for the potential number of mammoths living near the end of the ice age. They do not include the many more that lived during the ice age that could potentially have become fossils. Now, later on, I'm going to show you what they have found in the mammoths as far as them being healthy, or did they have health issues? And so, which was quite revealing. And so, but I'm going to show you what they found towards the end of this when we're talking about the ice age. Excuse me, when we're talking about the mammoths. But guys, we're going to stop right there. And when we come back, we are going to continue on, and we're going to talk about the muck. The muck, we're going to come back to it again, and some of the things that were found that Ord brings up to show that the mammoths were alive after the ice age, after the flood. After flood, then they lived during the ice age. And so we'll look at some of those things and talk about those. But you guys take care. I love you. Hope the Lord blesses you real good. Bye-bye.